For tonight, I'm happy to welcome back our presenter for the evening, Zandy Wright of Right to Learn. Zandy is a lifelong teacher with a focus on empowering adult learners. They have been teaching technology classes since 2017 in libraries, helping to make the digital world more approachable, safe, and fun. So please welcome Zandy Wright.
Thanks, Ryan. It's nice to be back here at Glenview. This has become one of my homes away from home. It's always nice to be working with Ryan. Let's see. So yes, we are talking today about, as we said, media bias and filter bubbles, and sort of how those work, how they happen, how we can try to avoid them where we can. This is me. Right to Learn is my small business. So I always like to start by just getting a sense of like, who's in the room? How are you approaching this topic to start with? What was it that made you want to come this evening? So I would love to start with that, to just dig into when you hear, let's see if I can hide this guy. There we go, hide floating meeting controls. What does media bias mean to you? When you hear that phrase, media bias, like what comes up?
People kept coming at some particular point of view, but it comes from the facts that will support their side, not necessarily looking at things objectively, but trying to argue a certain side that they,
Yes.
at a time before. Not actually to a conclusion or looking at the opposing side or weighing or balancing the two views.
Yes, so I heard two things. I heard one, coming at things from a particular point of view, and then maybe also like, rather than trying to look objectively at facts, sort of selectively gathering the facts or cherry picking the facts, cherry picking facts to support existing ideas. Okay, good. What else?
The way I kind of think about it is like try to direct you to certain information, maybe one news agency might, favor whatever, a certain politician or something, relay the information to put that in, I guess, a good spot.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So maybe framing that as like you hold, having a media outlet that holds an opinion or a set of values, and that's sort of either actively trying to promote those values, like trying to portray a person or an issue in a particular light. So actively promoting values / opinion. Okay, good. What else? Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes there are websites that you think are really completely unbiased, like the Pew research, but you never know, even though they report on what they see in their surveys, you never know how those people are being chosen. I mean, who are they questioning? And they never report that because there's no reason really to report it. So I think that always has bias also there internally. You're looking at 40% of the people supported such and such politician. Well, who were those people? How were they found?
Well, they probably went through 10 people and 44 of them had an opinion that they
Yeah, well, but so you're making an excellent point, because Pew is a good example, because they are they publish their research, but they are primarily a research organization first, and so where the Sun Times or Fox News or like whichever sort of reporting outlets you might choose, where they are doing a little bit more sort of just fact gathering and reporting. Organizations like Pew, when they're doing research, they might be doing things like, as you said, we're going to contact 1,000 people and ask them their opinions about something, and then put together a detailed report about those 1,000 people's opinions. But to your point, did they choose those 1,000 people randomly? Did they choose 1,000 people who live in Chicago? Like, we don't know necessarily yet. And we talked in the previous session some about like the value of peer review in scientific or medical studies, right? Part of what peer review does in a research function is it does actually look at the methodology. How did you conduct your research? How did you come to those conclusions? We don't necessarily have the same expectation of our journalists that there's, we're gonna shop this story around to 7 other journalists and make sure that everybody's on board before we publish it. Yeah.
Or how about, for example, if you had like protests, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two opposing sides have no across the street with each other. Meaning they just interview these people, but not these people, you know.
Yes. So who got interviewed and who got skipped? Or maybe people didn't even realize, there's we'll talk about different kinds of bias and the way that that can show up in different stories, but depending on who, like you said, who you choose to interview, or who you maybe just don't even know that person holds that opinion because they didn't come across your path. So it's hard to know all of that. Yeah. I think you had a hand as well.
My question is, I don't know what is media? I mean, is it TV? Is it newspapers? Is it online?
That is such an excellent question. And that's the kind of question I like to ask of like, what is bias? What is media? What do we mean by that? So yeah, I would say for me, it started as sort of like newspapers were the media back when newspapers were sort of all there was. And these days, I would say that includes, print newspapers, radio, TV, and all of those tend to also have some kind of an online presence. And then there's also all of the news outlets that are only online. So it's really can be any organization when we're talking about the media, sort of in quotes or in capital letters. Any organization that says like we are reporting the news. But then we get into like, social media and user created content and people just being able to put their opinions out into the world, right? The internet has made it sort of democratized our access to information in a way that lets anybody who with a computer and an internet and the desire to do so put their point of view out into the world, which in some ways it can be really good, right? It's removing a lot of sort of gatekeeping about whose voices we get to hear. And also it means that, the things that your cousin posts on Facebook probably have not been peer reviewed before your cousin decided to post them, for example. I have a cousin who posts on Facebook a lot. So when we say the media, so traditionally people often mean news media or journalistic media organizations where that is their business or their profession, but that line is getting quite blurry these days. Yep, of like, is this news or not? Yeah.
When we regards to that, you have these people that are doing these blogs. And so this big following, and then people can log on or listen or something and think that it may be 100% factual. When it may not be.
Yes. So I would say blogs, influencers, the rise of the influencer on typically on social media, podcasters. Many people have podcasts these days. They don't like check your credentials before you're allowed to start a podcast. You can just start one, which means, we want to be intentional about whose point of view we're consuming, whose points of view, like hopefully we're getting more than just one, and how prepared we are to just take everything that's said at face value versus still bring your critical thinking along for the ride. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, this is an excellent start. I am excited. Yeah, please, absolutely.
And now with the rise of AI, I guess that's like another factor. Another news source.
Yes. Tell me more about that, but yes, absolutely. Like, how does that contribute to bias?
Well, it's like what I've been seeing lately is like this fake made up things by AI. Like for example, I heard something not too long ago where I think like a newspaper had an article about like books, like top 10 books.
Oh, yes.
And I guess they were picked up by AI and no one bothered to even check it or something.
Mhm. Yes, which that was a very interesting story for the library world, I imagine, as well. Yes, so there was like a top 10 books to read this summer, and all of the authors were real authors, and so the organization publishing it just like, yeah, those look right, and didn't notice that the AI tool that the author had used to sort of shortcut the process and just write this list for me real quick, had done what's called hallucinating. It hallucinated the titles of the books, which were perfectly plausible book titles that could have been written by those authors, but were not written by those authors and in fact do not exist. Yeah. So there's a whole additional, we'll get a little bit into AI and sort of malicious disinformation, intentional deception in the third class in this series. But yeah, there is when content creators or when writers and journalists start outsourcing some of their work to AI, AI does not have the same sort of diligent fact checking abilities or sense of responsibility for fact checking. That's not built into how it functions, right? So if it doesn't know, it will sometimes just invent something, not maliciously, just in order to try to fulfill the task that it's been given. And if humans are not double checking, then yes, we can absolutely get things that oh, the AI said this, but that was actually not true, and we just didn't bother to double check before we published. Yeah. So one of the things that I think will probably come up a lot is the importance of, for lack of a better term, what I would call high quality media, right? Meaning following or getting your news from organizations that have a strong sense of value in, we fact check, we verify with multiple sources before we say that something is true. We go to experts for their opinions and not just, our cousin who studied nutrition one time, right? So organizations that are known to be diligent and that have sort of built a reputation of being diligent in that way. We'll talk about what some examples are of those kinds of organizations. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so when we talk about bias, we will get a little more specifically into media bias, but I'm actually going to just zoom us out a little bit first. So bias in general is just an inclination or a prejudice toward or against someone or something. And every single human being has biases. We cannot escape having them, right? I have had a whole set of lived experiences that are different from your set of lived experiences and yours. And all of those shape how we move through the world and what we believe. And even just the things that we pay attention to that we decide are important or not important, right? All of those are part of biases as well. So to have a bias is not inherently a bad thing. It's sort of an inescapable thing. And in fact, I tend to be a little bit more suspicious when people claim to be unbiased, because that to me tells me that maybe they haven't really sort of critically examined their own perspectives as much as I would maybe like them to. The problem becomes when we assume that there is no bias, or when there's a hidden bias, or people are not aware of the bias that they're encountering. So when we get into media bias, when you're consuming news, watching TV, reading news online, the definition that I like to use, this is from an organization from All Sides, which we'll talk about more. Media bias is the tendency of news media to report in a way that reinforces a viewpoint, worldview, preference, political ideology, corporate or financial interests, moral framework, or policy inclination, instead of reporting in an objective way, simply describing the facts. So there's a whole list of things there that one could be biased about, right? And organizations do, just like individuals, have a point of view. They have a reason for existing. They have their editorial boards that are made up of humans that tend to be sort of aligned in a particular direction or with a particular set of values. So bias shows up in our media just like it does in human beings. It's being aware of that bias and trying to not just assume that either one of two things, assume that there is no bias, or assume that the bias, that if there's one consistent bias that you're consuming, that's just the truth and everything else is false, right? Those are the things we want to avoid. So we're going to do a little activity. This is going to take us to the All Sides resource. Yeah, absolutely.
So with the bias, you know, when you were saying how, you know, someone can hear something and take that as the truth.
Mhm.
Would it depend, like, let's say they heard two versions of a story.
Mhm.
Would they tend to believe the first one or the second, or
Mhm.
does that matter?
Great question. Do you have a hypothesis about that?
Usually I think maybe
Mhm.
the first thing that they hear, I think they tend to.
Sure. I would buy that to some extent. We're going to talk about some of like what the research actually says that people are more inclined to believe. It is true that certainly that things that we learn like early in life, we tend to kind of carry with us as assumptions that inform how else we understand things. So if I have already heard, grew up believing that the I don't know, the cheapest store brand is always bad and you should never buy the cheapest store brand, right? If I was raised on that, even if I, as an adult, don't necessarily still consciously think that, that might still be a belief that I would sort of carry around with me that would color my viewpoint. So I would say it's probably a little bit more complicated than just which version did you hear first, because we almost never hear new information completely in a vacuum either. Right? It's usually informed by all of the other previous things that you've heard and learned and believed. But we'll dig into a little bit more what the research says about when people are most likely to believe or not. Yeah.
It's the repetition of what you constantly hear. It's the propaganda,
Yes.
right?
Yes, that is also true, right? The more often you hear a thing, the more likely you are to believe it, which, like let's be kind to ourselves and to our brain's coping mechanisms, right? If I see that the sun has come up so far every day that I've been alive, I'm probably going to assume that it's going to keep doing that, right? I have seen a pattern for however many years, like this keeps happening. And so I just assume that like that's the truth, right? So if we keep hearing a thing very consistently from multiple sources or multiple angles, we're going to assume that that sample size is relevant, right? We've heard this often enough that we think it's true. But yes, that's where the echo chamber problem starts to become a real problem. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Okay, so I'm going to share with you this resource, and this is linked in the slides when we're done. But so this is from All Sides, which is they are a public benefit corporation, which means they are a business, but they have a commitment and like a legal obligation to the sort of social benefit point of view that they bring, which is very specifically trustworthy, balanced news with what they call bias analysis. So they're not saying we are the unbiased news source. They're saying we're going to show you multiple news sources and talk about the bias that we see. So let's look at, they have this lovely thing called headline roundups, where basically they will put side by side, let's see, we'll look at this one, this Amazon one. They put side by side headlines and then links to the actual stories of the same story reported by multiple different news outlets, along with their rating of that news outlet of how left, right, or center does it tend to skew. So this is like a relatively innocuous one. I don't know if you all noticed the internet was sort of down for a while on Monday. So the headline from the left, Amazon cloud computing outage disrupts Snapchat, Robinhood, and many other online services. Relatively similar to from the right, half the internet goes down after Amazon cloud outage, leaving millions unable to use Ring, Alexa, and banking apps. From the center, Amazon Web Services outage downed dozens of major websites and apps. So these examples, right, not wildly different from one another, but what do you notice that is a little different? Yeah.
Things like the Snapchat and the Robinhood, it's all more younger,
Mm.
I want to say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The banking, I don't know, I think older people use some banking apps, but I don't know.
Sure.
Well, I think the one on the right kind of, you know, goes a little bit beyond the hours, claiming that, half the internet
Mm.
is unavailable.
Mhm.
Really just, the Amazon cloud server that contain these applications.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, and it's interesting. So they've got these sort of the scare quotes around half the internet, like they're quoting somebody, but they did choose to put that quote in the headline, right? We don't usually put quotes in headlines necessarily. So that selection of that sort of somewhat extreme framing of the issue, absolutely. And then also, yes, right, there is an interesting sort of decision making. I assume that all of those things are true, right? Not maybe not the half the internet part, but that Snapchat, Robinhood, Ring, Alexa, banking apps, that all of those were affected. But the editors of those papers or those media outlets made decisions about which ones to include in their headlines, probably based on, and I heard you say that the left-leaning story maybe skews younger, right? So probably based on who either they know tends to read their stories or who they want to read their stories, right? So let's look at one, let's see.
I was gonna say in that one,
Yeah,
like in the center, they don't mention which one. Whereas
yes.
the left and the right, they mention specific ones that might cater to.
Mhm.
Audience going to be in purchase, but they do, but the center doesn't actually mention any of the right.
Yeah, which is a really interesting sort of editorial decision, right? Of like, we could choose some specific things from the list, but we're not going to. We're just going to say that it's a long list and let you read the whole story probably to get more details. Yeah.
So I have a question, so what's the purpose of putting it in this format? Is it to like let you see the similarities or differences and then make your own opinion?
Yes, and so you can see the similarities or differences. You can also, for any of these from the All Sides website, you can click and go and read the full story. But yes, so often the other thing that a lot of us do, and I have had to start sort of catching myself doing this, is I'll start to say like, oh, I saw it in the news, and then I'll say, well, no, I saw a headline that said that this happened. And did I click to read the full story? No, I did not. I just saw the headline, right? We do this a lot, right? We see the headline, we go, oh, wow, that's amazing or horrible or whatever it is. And then we just keep scrolling. So yes, right. The purpose here is partly to see, even when you're reporting the same set of facts, how can the headline, just that piece reflect that bias? And when we get into talking about algorithms and echo chambers, if you're just seeing the headlines, but you're seeing the same kinds of headlines repeatedly, how does that inform what you're likely to believe? Because most people will, or many people, I should say, not most, many people will not actually see all three versions of any given headline, right? They will see the one that comes from a media source that they already follow. So
I guess maybe in a way that this is like an attempt to, I mean, I'm not really familiar with all sides, but just from what I see, it kind of seems like, maybe an attempt to try to eliminate the bias, like, well, you can't, I mean, they basically say the same headline.
Right.
Right, that there's an outage, but I guess if they let you see it from the different sides, then, you can't just say, well, these people are saying this, but the other ones are not.
yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly. And it makes people more aware of the fact that when we see something and we go, oh, it was in the news, it must be true, right? That like true can have a lot of interpretation involved. Yes. So let's see. I'm going to scroll down a little further to, let's do this one. Who's to blame for prolonging the government shutdown? Interestingly to me, in this one, we have two from the right and one from the left. Again, same story being covered. These are very different, right? Where we started with one where it's like pretty much the same basic facts. We have from the right, the White House may run out of funds to pay military if shutdown continues, Johnson warns. And also from the right, shutdown theatrics just distract us from the real problem, obscene national debt. I will note, by the way, when you asked what is media, there's also some very interesting sort of nuance of what do we consider news versus opinion and how do we make that distinction? for me, when somebody says, here's the real problem, that falls squarely under opinion, right? That is that person communicating their values, and I may or may not agree with them. But newspapers and other media do carry opinion pieces. Sometimes we don't realize that something is being published as an opinion piece, not set out as factual reporting. So that's another example here. I love this from the left. The truth behind Republicans' shutdown strategy. Right? If you've been following this set of stories, you know that like the left blames the right blames the left. You know, they had another sort of similar set of headlines the other day that's no longer in the list, but sort of like whose shutdown are we calling it? Is it the Democrats' shutdown? Is it the Republicans' shutdown? Is it Schumer's shutdown? And so again, even when you're reporting the same core set of facts, the words that you choose to talk about it, the way that you frame it, where you place the blame, even in just a single sentence, right, can dramatically influence how people interpret that information, what information we decide to believe.
And on those letters, that's like how far on the spectrum?
Yes, yeah. So a little bit later, we will look at, so All Sides does some other things besides just these headline roundups. They do rating of media bias across a whole, I think like a couple thousand different media outlets. So this is based on their historical like analysis of those sources. They say Fox News leans like pretty far right. New York Post leans pretty far right. They did label this as opinion, that's good. They say Washington Post leans sort of center left, right? Not all the way to the left, but left-ish. And so, yes, you'll see that in these sort of comparisons of the headlines, where you can kind of see here's a right, left, center, etc. Nope, totally free. Yeah, great question. Some of the sources that they link out to, if you go to read the story might be behind a paywall. But yeah, this website is free. Yeah. I'll say one other a feature that I really like about this site is that even you'll notice, right, if we were doing this sort of just like laying this out spatially, we would say, well, the left goes on the left and the right goes on the right and the center goes in the center. And All Sides decided not to do that. They mix up the order of which position appears where. Why? It forces you to read it more closely. I think that's true. Yep. You have to actually pay attention to like, wait, which one is this? Yep. Yes. Right. So that does actually, if I came here looking for like, well, I only want to read the left leaning headlines because that's what I believe, I could just sort of read down in a straight column. And so this does force us to actually look. That is part of it. I'll also say, they say this actually at the top of their website, which I appreciate. We rotate the order of headlines to avoid biasing our coverage in favor of the left, which otherwise would always be listed first, right? But like, if they just laid it out in that nice, consistent way, it would always be left, then center, then right. And there's an inherent, even if a subtle, bias in just that layout that they're intentionally sort of noticing and saying like, nope, let's not do that, right? Let's mix it up. So they're very thoughtful about this, which is great because this is what they do. Okay, so what are some examples or some of the things that we saw about how bias was showing up in those headlines? And I can kind of toggle between them if we need to. So like if we go back to where's the shutdown one? Yep. What are some of the things that we're seeing that contributes to our sense of more of a bias or a particular kind of bias in those headlines? Blame, yes. And like who is to blame? And that might be like a person that's named or a group, Democrats, immigrants, whoever, like whatever the group is that we're saying is at fault. Good. What else?
Just in general, what happens if they use words that trigger emotions?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Well, I don't know much like say that word theatrics. That sounds a little biased. It's like they made an opinion, well, it's theatrical here.
Yes. Heavy emotional weight of words. Yeah. So word choice like theatrics. and obscene national debt, right? Obscene is like, that's a really loaded word, right? It's not just like high national debt, it's obscene national debt. Yeah. I like this one too. When I say like, the truth behind Republicans' shutdown strategy. What's the sort of manipulation that's happening here?
Well, they're kind of implying that there's some kind of hidden agenda.
Yes. Yeah. So like implying hidden agenda of the other guys, right? We are here to tell you the truth. Those other guys are trying to keep it a secret, and we are the good guys coming forth with the truth here. Yeah. Okay. Let's see what I'm going to scroll back up to our example about the Amazon outage, because there are some more subtle examples in here as well. What else did we notice that was maybe contributing to subtle instances of bias?
When they say have the internet
Uh-huh.
and you're unable to use banking apps, people, you know, they can really panic.
Yes. So that's sort of, again, like extreme language. And we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of what's called clickbait. Are we familiar with this phrase clickbait? What does clickbait mean to you?
See, it has on you, click on it to read it.
Yes, right. Then that's what they want, right? That's, I mean, you know, if you put a news story out into the world, you're doing that because you hope people will read it. So like to some extent, you know, that's what writing headlines is for. But clickbait headlines in particular, right, often will do things like, you know, half the internet goes down and we go, oh my goodness, I have to find out what, you know, what happened. How did that? So yeah, we gotta dig into the details by going to read the article. We're gonna come back to that idea. One of the other things we talked about in this example was even just the selection of examples, right? In a list of apparently dozens of major websites, the left-leaning and the right-leaning chose which ones to mention by name. And that, you know, even if it's a subtle difference between the headlines, there is some intentionality in which ones you choose. Yep.
Plus, you know, it seems like they're, listing popular. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's probably thousands of apps out there, you know, but they already, you know, highlight them. Ones that are the most important.
Yes.
Otherwise, if it's, you know, shows, garage or something, you know, nobody would care about.
Yep. Yeah. And actually, so that's, you know, when on the left leaning example, it was, you know, Snapchat and Robinhood, which, you know, like Snapchat, as you said, is probably skews a little younger, social media. Robinhood is like an investment site that is sort of like social justice leaning, like investing in sort of causes in the world, right? So having that context, knowing that, you know, these are, we're pointing out the badness of these sites that are important to us being down, versus on the right, Ring, which are folks familiar with Ring? This is the like the virtual doorbell, which also will like record your neighbors walking around, and yeah, that's a whole other class. But yes, Ring, Alexa, banking apps, right? Choosing what are the apps or the resources that are most likely, that our readers are most likely to care about. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to put in audience awareness, which is not in itself a bad thing. This is, I have taught before, and maybe someday we'll teach again, just like college composition and teaching people who are learning to write effectively about audience awareness. Who are you writing for? What are you trying to communicate to that person or group is an important skill. And right, clickbait and audience awareness and writing things that your, what sometimes get called your base or your readers will want to read is a big part of what happens with media bias. Yeah. All right, so now it's your turn. We are going to bias this headline. We're going to come up with a couple of different versions of a biased interpretation of this headline. So local schools to add 3 new holiday closures in 2026. Let's see, let's start with, somebody was approaching this from a bias of holiday closures bad. We need more time in school. We don't want the schools to close. What might that headline sound like?
kids sent home.
Sure, yeah.
Our days a year.
Kids sent home to not learn for 3 extra days. Yes, good. I love it. Yeah. All right. What about maybe on a more positive side, if someone is like, this is, these are important holiday closures that, that we need to recognize, and this is a win for something or other. What might that headline sound like?
I just want to ask what you say.
Mhm.
First of all, it seems like there's so many holidays. And then the other day, I saw kids home from school and I asked them, it's like, there's no school today? And they're like, oh, no, there's a holiday. I'm like, well, what holiday?
Mm.
Well, I don't know what holiday. We just had the day off.
Yeah. Obscure holidays added to school calendar. Yes. So if that's our headline, right? If we are all writing a news story about this and we say obscure holidays added to, right? What am I doing here to incorporate my point of view into this headline?
You don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I'm saying like who ever heard of this holiday, right? That's not an important holiday. Let's call it an obscure holiday, right? Yeah. Let's see. What about somebody who thinks this is a good idea? Just like, yes, very pro adding these holidays.
Schools to celebrate significant cultural events.
Yes.
Something like that.
Significant. Can I spell significant? Cultural events with new holidays. Great. Yes. Right. So again, same. And when I say same facts, right, I mean same like one sentence of facts. But the way that we present those facts at like a headline format can dramatically change how we're likely to interpret that information, especially if we then don't go on to read the whole story, right? If we just read the headline and keep going. Yeah. Okay. Good work. You are all hired as clickbait headline writers.
I think that first one there should get an award. Yeah.
It is excellent clickbait. Yeah. All right. So then now I want to layer in another piece of this, right? Because so far, actually, an interesting, we could do a whole class on like the history of sensational journalism and the idea of like yellow journalism, which, wildly predates the internet. This is a thing that, are you familiar with the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads? This is the idea that like let's put all the murders and all the gory stuff and all the scary stuff, all that stuff goes in the newspaper. Preferably on the front page, preferably with a big full color picture. Why? Because it's gripping, right? Because people will buy the newspaper.
Sensational.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So there's the history of sensationalized news reporting wildly predates the internet. And when we talk about echo chambers, what is an echo chamber? I'm going to put up my nice little visual to help us with this discussion.
You're saying the same thing over and over. It just kind of bounces back.
Yes.
People who have heard it on one side.
Yes, exactly. Right. If we filled up a whole room with, let's say, if we filled up a room at the library with people who care about media literacy, just as an example, right, you might hear sort of the same point of view reflected back from multiple perspectives, kind of bouncing off of other people, and we just all sort of agree, like, yes, that is truth. That is the correct answer, right? So an echo chamber describes what happens when we are mostly or only exposed to ideas that reflect our existing biases. Yep. Yeah, question.
So for example, you have these big media conglomerates, right? You say they own several media outlets, right? So if they're tending to promote a certain bias, then I guess, one of them would create it and then the others would like reinforce it.
Potentially, yes. And there absolutely are, so like the Washington Post breaks the story and then other news outlets then sort of pick up the story or, like learn that a thing has happened and they publish their own versions of the story. I will say though that within well, and you said like media conglomerates, which, you know, if they are sort of owned by the same parent company, right, those are potentially more likely to have some of the same sets of biases. Although also sometimes the media conglomerates will diversify on purpose of like, let's write a version of this for these folks and a version for those folks. But yes, so that absolutely can happen. And also, you know, we see a fair amount of sort of like Cubs versus White Sox energy of different media outlets of like, well, you know, those people said it this way and our way is the right way, right? So you do get sort of some competitiveness between media outlets. The challenge, I think, can come when we as consumers, we put ourselves into a position of really only hearing one side or one aspect of stories. So in general, tell me about actually before I fill in the slides, what are some ways that you might find yourself accidentally in an echo chamber outside of the internet, just like in general?
You know, lots of times I think people in groups, if you're either in person or it can happen online too, like maybe in a chat box, you know, it's just that the people there just want to be accepted. And so they go ahead, you know, and agree with whatever someone said, maybe the person who was leading the discussion or maybe someone else,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that happens really often. It's the need to be accepted. And I think that that's getting worse and worse because of all the loneliness in the world.
Yeah.
You know, you want to connect with somebody and you just can't. And oh, here's somebody that I can connect with. And I don't even know if that's done consciously. It may not be, but you know, and I think that that's really insidious. I think that's something we need to really kind of ask ourselves if the idea is important. I mean, if it affects a lot of people, or you know, this, how many people are just agreeing to, you know, because they need to agree.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of us, I will put myself in this bucket. I'm not a huge fan of conflict, right? So like if someone expresses an opinion, my default position, if possible, is to not come in swinging and say like, well, here's all the ways you're wrong, right? Is
that
right? Yes. Now if someone expresses an opinion that I strongly disagree with, then I probably will have to like talk about that. But yeah, so part of this, and you're actually naming an interesting nuance of this point, but it is related to this point. So there's this thing that has been widely studied among humans and other animals also. So it's called homophily. As social creatures, we tend to seek out and feel more connected to people who are like us in some way, right? And that could be, you know, so I grew up in Sacramento. I have a friend who I made on the internet, who I made purely because we were in a professional webinar and they said, you know, tell us in the chat who, you know, your name and where you're from. And he said, I'm Jerry from Sacramento. And I was like, hey, Sacramento. And we like became friends on the internet purely for that reason, right? No good reason that we should have become friends other than that, like, I saw that we had that thing in common and I reached out, right? So we like to be around people who we feel like we have something in common with, or who, you know, reflect back our same values, or who we feel accepted by, right? Yeah.
So, in addition to that lady was saying about the, you know, like you say, somebody have something in common. But like you were saying earlier, like with the influencers, you know, Taylor Swift or Oprah or somebody, you know, they've got millions of followers, you know, so, you know, if Oprah says, you know, tomorrow's the end of the world, then the rest of the people, yeah, it's true, you know, but then on the other hand, though, isn't there like there's monetary incentive, right?
Yes.
Because you know, they, you know, advertising and, they're getting paid for clicks and all this other kind of stuff, right?
Yes, yeah, we are going to talk about that. In fact, that's like maybe 2 or 3 slides from now. Yep. Because yes, that is a big part of how the internet works and why it is as big as it is and how it makes money. So yeah, we'll talk about that. But yes, first, before we get into the internet and the financial aspect of the internet, in general, right, there's a couple of things that contribute to echo chambers just in sort of social settings, right? One of them is this idea of homophily, that we tend to just gravitate to people who reflect back to us our own identities, our own sort of qualities or experiences, things like that. Selection bias. This is partly what was coming up when we were talking about, in research studies, how did they choose those 1,000 people to ask a question of? So our exposure to ideas is not random. It is skewed by other patterns like who we spend time with, or, if I happen to live, next or down the street from a Starbucks, and so that Starbucks is like the convenient coffee shop for me on my way to the bus, I'm probably over time going to develop like a fairly positive affinity for Starbucks just because like I go there a lot. That's the one that I'm exposed to, right? So selection bias, what ideas are presented to us, who we talk to, like, when you are exposed to a wider variety of points of view, you tend to develop sort of a wider range or a sort of a more flexible approach to understanding the world. When you are exposed to a very small sort of like limited sample, then we tend to, again, sort of align ourselves with what we've learned, what we've seen. The last one is confirmation bias. And this is when you were talking about, do people believe like the first thing or the second thing? The research shows overwhelmingly that we are most likely to believe the thing that confirms what we already thought, right? If I am presented with 3 different interpretations of an event, the one that I feel like is truth, I probably will think that it's truth because it tallies with what I knew before. And again, to some extent, right, this is like a reasonable adaptation to how much information we're consuming at any given time, right? If I had, to go back to my previous example, if I had, seen that so far every day of my life, the sun has come up, and then, one time I heard somebody say like, oh, the sun's not going to come up tomorrow, right? I would be pretty justified in being like, I don't know, I don't think so, right? Like I have a lot of evidence that says that you're wrong. And so I'm much more likely to just discount that one bit and just keep trusting the thing that I have been hearing for my whole life or seeing my whole life. The problem with this, of course, right, is that when we already think that we know what the truth is, and so we only like absorb the things that reinforce that truth, and we get, I put up my filter bubble view again, right? We get sort of like a bubble or like an armor of other ideas just sort of bounce off. Like, yes, I've heard that idea, but I didn't pay attention to it because it didn't confirm what I already thought. Yeah.
Let's say, for example, somebody gets married, I used to be Democrat, and then I got married, and my wife is Republican. That way, my husband's a Cubs fan, I was a Sox fan, so now I'm a Cubs fan. My mom believes in aliens and whatever, So is that like a selection bias or?
Yeah, that's a good example. That's probably, so there are other biases besides just these. These are sort of like some of the heavy hitters, but there is also one that's called in-group bias, which is that it's sort of like a variation on a confirmation bias, which is that we're more likely to believe a thing that confirms what we already thought. We're also more likely to believe a thing that comes from a group that we identify with, right? So like if I'm gonna pick on Ryan here for a minute. There was a library conference last week that Ryan and I both went to. And so if Ryan hears news or interpretation of the news from a group of librarians, right? As a librarian, statistically, I don't actually know this about you, like how likely you are to trust other librarians, but statistically, right? Ryan is more likely to say, like subconsciously, right? I heard this from a group of librarians. I'm a librarian, I trust myself, therefore I trust them, therefore I'm more likely to assume that it's true, right? So yes, we get that sort of that in-group bias, which is maybe a little bit different from like this one specific person that I trust. But we absolutely do see that of like, well, my community said that this is true, right? And that in some ways that ties back to the homophily thing as well, right? We are social creatures. We survived by forming, bands or tribes and collaborating and having a shared point of view. That's how we got here. But then that can become a problem when you're just seeing the same ideas repeated back to you all the time. Yeah. All right, let's talk about We'll do this one just really briefly. What are some examples of places where you might encounter an offline echo chamber? So not social media, but other places. Sure, family, yeah, absolutely, right? There's a very common phenomenon where people, are like grow up thinking that a thing is perfectly normal, and then they, go away to college or move out on their own, and they go, oh, not everybody does that. Oh, my bad. So yes, family. Good. What else? Sure. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people going,
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Right. If let's see, if I go and work out at the gym where all of the super duper fit, like people work out, right? I'm more likely to over time sort of adopt the worldview, the sense of like, what does fit or healthy look like that I'm exposed to in that circle because of that exposure. Yeah. What else?
I mean, in line with family, it's also friends.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, right. Again, and we like to be around people who we feel like who are mirroring us back to ourselves in positive ways, who we feel aligned with. Most of us don't intentionally, I shouldn't say most, many of us don't intentionally surround ourselves with conflicting points of view, right? Because that feels stressful. We want to just be around people who we feel like comfortable with. And so, yeah, friend groups, I would add like faith communities, right? Not as a knock to faith communities, but again, right? It's a group of people with a shared value system who all talk to each other and reinforce that same value system. Yeah. Okay, now let's add the internet into the picture because that does some weird stuff. So before I have a video to show you, but I would love to hear from you first. On the internet, filter bubbles is sort of like the particular language that we hear for echo chambers that happen on the internet, especially, but not only on social media. What else is driving that? We started to kind of name this a little earlier. So it's partly like, my friends have the same points of view that I do, or, I'm connected to these people and we share a position on something.
So I'm sure what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what do you think about filter?
Yeah, I forgot what you mean by filter bubble.
Yeah, good question. So tell you what, here's what I'll do. I will show you the video instead, and that will give us a sort of a better sense of what I mean by filter bubbles. But was there something you wanted to add before I do that?
Algorithms.
Yes.
Like what you click on the internet then the internet will respond and give you like
Yes.
things,
Mm-hmm.
like you're looking for a car, so you do car ads, and then all of a sudden you see car ads wherever you go,
Yep.
and then even 2 months later when you already bought a car, they're still there.
Yes. Yep. So this is also sometimes called algorithmic bias. Basically, the algorithms, the equations, the AI actually that helps to determine which parts of the internet you see are responsive to what you've done in the past, what you've looked at, what you've clicked on. And so we'll watch a video where this guy is a comedian and a person that I follow on the internet. And I saved this because I was like, that is an excellent example of how this works. So, oh yes, and thank you. We will mute. come about, right? Oh, yes, thank you. There, good. No more echo. Excellent example of how filtered bubbles come about in condensed into like a 15-minute, very intentional experience. You can try this at home if you, and there've been some interesting sort of stories from folks who have done this of like, let me make 2 new Twitter X accounts or whatever, right? And on one of them, I'm gonna only follow and like posts from left-leaning politicians and perspectives. And on the other one, I'm gonna only follow and like posts from right-leaning. And very quickly, right, you start to see the information that's presented to you in the one versus the other becomes very different, right? So that the algorithm piece of this is a big contributor online specifically and in social media in particular. This can happen to some extent in things like Google searches, in like what news stories pop up. It definitely happens if you get alerted to news stories on your phone. I get alerted to news stories about libraries all the time. Probably, maybe Ryan gets. Probably nobody else in this room gets like, alerts on their phone with news about libraries. So this happens, right, intentionally by design as part of how the folks who create these sites or the news stories want us to experience the internet. So
Well, same thing with music, like you say you want Elvis or something. Music from the 50s or what, and then it just starts playing all these, you didn't ask for it, but this, well, this is similar to this one, so let's, put a video on YouTube.
Yep. Yes, yeah, and so all of those sites where there's sort of like there's lots of content, you couldn't possibly see all of the content, so we're going to curate which parts of the content we think you want. All of those sites, Netflix does this too, Amazon, all of the online shopping sites that show you like, here's a thing we thought you might want to buy, right? That's based on your past behavior on that site or maybe on other sites. And their best prediction, and all of this is AI, by the way. Side note, like you don't have to go talk to ChatGPT to be interacting with AI. There's algorithms that are showing you things that they think you will like. Why do they want to show you things that you, or well, I should say that differently. Showing you things that in the case of like Amazon, that they think you might want to purchase. In the case of news things, it may not be things that they think you will like feel positively about, but it will probably be things that they think you will react to or interact with. Why?
The more time you spend on the internet reading, so the more ads they can show you, the more likely you're advertising.
Yes. So this brings us to something called the attention economy. This concept actually started again, before the internet was widespread, but so like in the 1960s and 70s, this concept was introduced. The internet has perfected it. So the attention economy, essentially your online attention in particular, is somebody else's profit. Somebody is making money off of the fact that you are on the internet paying attention to a thing most of the time. There are some exceptions to this. If you're on the library's website, for example, the library probably doesn't make money off of you being on the library's website.
I'm seeing
Good for you. You get yours. All right. So yeah, how and why does this happen? First of all, ads are the big driver of this, right? Digital ads are a huge business, $258 billion with a B dollars in the US alone last year. And businesses, right? I have a business, like they buy ads because they want you to find out that they exist, to buy something from them, to come to their event, whatever it is, right? So businesses pay, pay Google or pay Facebook or wherever it is that you're encountering that ad. Businesses have paid to have that ad be there. Other websites like news media make then their money by selling ads, right? And by the way, right, this predates the internet. If you remember, I am old enough to remember getting a print newspaper, and opening it up and like, here's the coupon section and here's the half-page ad for the TVs that are going to be on sale for Black Friday, right? Advertisements have been in news media much longer than we've had the internet, but on the internet, we have the algorithms as well, right? And the algorithms reward content that draws attention and engagement. And so this is why even major media outlets, even the New York Times and the Guardians and the sort of like, the Wall Street journals, right? They still write headlines trying to get people to go, oh, interesting, I should read that story. That sounds important. That sounds informative. And then you get the folks who are saying, kids sent home to not learn for 3 days, right? The sort of the extreme clickbait versions, right? All of this, the whole machine, well, there are still some organizations that really just want you to have the news. That does still exist. I shouldn't be too cynical. But right, the way that the internet makes money is by you looking at things and clicking on things and being online. And sometimes I say that and then I'm like, I'm going to scare them away from the internet. They're never going to want to go online ever again. There are also good things on the internet, just to be clear. Okay, so back to media bias. Where does this bring us with media bias? So we talked a little bit about headlines and ads drive revenue, right? We get people who go to a particular site to read a particular story, or they click on or they like a social media post, because of or like those interactions are the things that drive revenue for those businesses. But news reporting is not just headlines. Bias shows up in the actual reporting too, right? If we had clicked into those stories from all sides, we would see that it's not just 3 different wacky headlines with the same exact coverage of the news. So we're going to actually do a little example revisiting our story about local schools adding 3 new holiday closures. Let's see, we have 7 people. I have 4 copies of each of these, so I'm going to distribute 2. Does that work? Kind of. 2, 1. Everybody will get 1 or 2 of these, but we'll get a chance to discuss all 3. So, and actually, yes, then if you share, then everybody gets 2. Great, love that. Okay. So 1 and 2. Good. And I'm leaving out Ryan. Sorry, Ryan. But also Ryan saw these before we started. So, all right, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. There we go. Look at that mathing. Yes, please. These are yours to keep. This is, by the way, a story that I made up. So, don't go home and tell your friends that local school is adding 3 new holiday closures. Okay, so we are going to imagine that 3 different fictional media outlets have covered this story. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes. You can do this alone, or you can turn around and talk to your neighbor. But take a look at the 2 examples that I shared. See what you notice about how I've left out headlines. There are no headlines in these, but how the coverage of the story reflects a particular point of view or particular bias. And then we'll talk about it. Yeah, feel free to mark these up if that's helpful for you. ahead and talk about these. So I will put them up. Oh, I meant to put this up as well. So as you were reading, things you might have noticed whose points of view were included in the story, and who or what maybe gets left out. And then some of the same things that we noticed in the headlines, right? Which is, how does the author's opinion show through in the way that they framed the issue, in their word choice, in other decisions that they might have made in how to cover this story. So let's look at, we'll look at each of these briefly together. So who had the Village Weekly? This was the one that's number one. Okay, good, a few folks. All right, tell me about what you noticed on this one. You can read it up on the screen if you didn't have it in front of you. I don't want to read all of them out loud because that's a lot, but what did you notice about this one, bias-wise?
Well, the italics. I have.
Oh yeah, yes, those italics. Let's see, so yeah, in the first sentence, parents and teachers are bracing for more disruption next year after the school board voted to tack on 3 more holiday closures in 2026, right? That emphasis on 3 more in italics. What does that communicate to you? Yeah, yep. Adding 3 more, right, is like, this is just over the top, unbelievable, right? There's some other sort of language choices even in that first sentence that we could probably call out as well. Let's see, I'm gonna.
The word disruption.
Yeah. So let's see, 3 more. We're describing this as disruption. And I would add to that, parents and teachers are bracing, right? We're like, it's just like, hold on, we're gonna, it's coming, this bad thing, whatever it is coming. Yeah. So even just in the first half of the first sentence, right? That sort of loaded language about bracing, disruption, 3 more holidays. And then we get even sort of a little more overt with it, right? Yet another sign that academic priorities are taking a back seat to feel good politics. Yeah, this one, for me, right, this smells like an opinion piece to me, right, rather than something that is even trying to be sort of fact-based and neutral. So taking a back seat, right, is a very sort of value-laden judgment or phrase that they've put in. Was that a hand as well? Yeah.
Yeah, another thing that I noticed is too, sometimes when people get together, they don't know what to say.
Mm.
I mean, they're in a group, and I've been in that situation where, maybe you're not really up to whatever the topic is. You don't know what to say. And sometimes people talk just to complain.
Mm.
They bring something up because they want to talk and they want to be a part of the conversation, and they just complain. Well, that 3 more would really lead into that, Well, did you see online, or, 3 more, I mean, it's something that can be repeated easily.
Sure.
And then the person who is contributing so-called to the conversation feels that they contributed. I mean, there's so many things that come into play that have to do with personality and self-confidence or lack of self-confidence in that particular situation. So it's really, the kind of things that you're talking about are really difficult to understand how to deal with them. How do you combat them? Or how do you not combat? How do you confront them?
Sure.
How do you deal with them? And then in the second paragraph too, you're probably going to bring this stuff up. The word virtue really stood out to me. I mean, they're more interested in virtue signaling. I've never heard that phrase before, but that concept, of course, I think we're all familiar with. The kinds of things you're bringing up are really difficult, I think.
Yeah.
To deal with.
Yeah.
I was going to say in our society, but maybe it's always been this way. It's just kind of a shift,
Well, and certainly, right, as we are in these online spaces where we can have more people, participating in the conversation, and then even lots more people sort of watching the conversation, right? For every, people who are getting into a fight in the comments, there's, another couple thousand who are sort of like looky-looing from the sidelines at the fight that's happening in the comments. So this certainly sort of gets a lot more exposed, I think, in online spaces. Interestingly, there is a theory, I don't know, I have not confirmed the evidence for this theory myself, but there is a theory that one of the reasons that humans developed language and the extent of our language capabilities that we have is for the purpose of gossip, the purpose of talking about other people, right? Because we are social creatures, that's how we get around in the world. So like the reason that humans have the language capabilities that we have and that, you know, dolphins or chimpanzees have some language, but not as sophisticated is because we gossip. Just that one theory, not the only one that's out there.
And if they could, they would.
That's true, right? Totally possible. Yeah. So yes, but so this is right, a good example of like very sort of direct opinion being stated. I'll point out this one is interesting to me in comparison to one of the ones that we'll see next, because it does, we do get sort of the perspective of board members and critics, right? Here's what board members say, here's what critics say. We do get sort of this nod at both sides. And then what?
It's pretty much dismissed.
Yes, right. Yeah, this author is sort of making a move as if to be like, look, I showed you what the critics said, I showed you what the board said, but in fact, we're still really getting a very clear perspective, a very clear opinion from this person. Yeah, let's compare that against the next one. If I can get my slides to go, there we go. Okay, so who had the penny review? Yes, okay, a few folks. All right, what did you notice about this one?
This one was more balanced, it seemed like it tried to show both sides. Without trying to push one up or push one down, it seemed like as much as the other ones. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe I just play it right.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
I would say this one certainly shows a different side. There is a third one that is
Oh, no,
more
no, no,
balanced.
no.
Okay, good. Yes, good. I was going to say there is a third one that is more actually balanced. Yes. Mhm. Yes, a landmark decision for inclusion. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Here we go. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, we'll look at that one next. Yeah, and I like even, right, there's the inclusion of specific facts as well, right? Which in the very critical one that we saw before, we saw that board members defend these closures as a celebration of inclusion. We didn't see that it was a unanimous vote, right? There were no dissenting voices on the board. Where this very pro perspective, right, is including that fact that they voted unanimously. Everybody agreed that this was a good idea.
There's so many extremes there too, the landmark decision. Unanimously and long overlooked.
Yes.
Did you create this?
Yes, I did.
So the plan developed after months of
Mhm.
community input. I mean, this is really extreme.
Yep.
And then they minimize the downside if they will not significantly affect.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
Diversity has become such a key word in everything. It has to have the word diverse in there somewhere.
Mm.
Otherwise, they think you'll be, discriminatory in some way. So diversity has become much more broadly understood now, and you're supposed to always think in terms of what isn't diverse,
Yes.
Like, well, what kind of cereal are you having in the morning?
Mm.
Well, is it diverse? If so,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sure. I mean, yes. And also there's also been recently a pushback against diversity and even like this word, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? In our current political moment, there's been a strong push against that, which actually, we could bring in a political scientist to talk about, why it happens that when we get sort of one perspective coming in really strongly, then sometimes you get the other one, you get this sort of like arms race to who can have the hottest hot take, right? The strongest opinion about something. I will say though, if we think about the word diversity in maybe like the sense of like reading a diverse set of news sources, for example, right? Diverse meaning just like coming from different perspectives. Like I'm in this context, I'm going to come down on the side of diversity for that, but particularly because we're talking about the issue of, we want to avoid just only getting your information from one place. Yeah. All right, let's look at the one that was a little more balanced. Let's see. Okay. So this is the one that you were talking about earlier. Yes. Yes. So, yeah, tell me about this one, how the approach is a little different.
They seem to be sort of talking about both sides, but they're not trying to, like, the other ones were trying to push up the facts that they thought were good for the side and push down or minimize the issues that were against it, but they seem to sort of present both sides, but they don't seem to be trying to like put their finger on the scale as much.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. And yeah, notice, right, even in the first sentence, we get essentially this story is a little bit more about the controversy, right? That it's being welcomed by advocates, but criticized by some parents. We get that right up front. Here's this point of view, here's that point of view, right? And again, we do get, here's another sort of good journalistic tactic, that rather than the author saying, these values reflect our community, something, whose perspectives are being represented there?
Both the board and the parent.
Mm-hmm.
With actual quotes, right?
Yes, right, and quotes, so that like where there are opinions being reflected here, right? It is not necessarily the author's opinion. It is, let me provide a quote from a board member expressing their opinion, and then let me provide a different quote from a parent expressing a dissenting opinion, right? And we don't see that more sort of value-laden language coming from the author's point of view. Yeah.
So by doing it that way, as a writer, you're making it more balanced versus more opinionated.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's the like when you see news media outlets that are labeled as being more centrist or more balanced in their coverage, this is a good example of what you tend to see is that when there's controversy, they'll report on the controversy, but the controversy is part of the story rather than like I'm going to choose a side and only report from that side. Yep. And making sure I was mentioning before the class started. So I did high school journalism and college journalism, and then decided to do teaching instead of professional journalism. But one of the first things you learn when you're a baby journalist is, did you get quotes from just one side of the point of view, or did you get at least one or two quotes from other people who might not agree with the first people you talked to? Yeah. So getting sort of a good sample of perspectives as part of how you're even learning about the story before you start writing. Yeah. And I would say even like the wrap up here, right? The growing challenge of balancing X with Y, right? That again, the reporting here is about the fact that there is dissent rather than trying to take a strong perspective. Like this is the right angle to take. Yeah. Yeah.
So then also can you, let's see, for example, political campaigns, right? So we have like, someone running someone's campaign or they're trying to sway opinion, they put a more positive spin on something. Are they, is it more like one-sided or is it,
Yes.
or is it like us against them or our guys better, that guy's no good?
Yes, absolutely, all of that. Yep. And that's the reason that in political ads that they have to say, paid for by so and so for such and such, right? Is that like we've recognized that we need to know whose perspective, you're welcome, whose perspective is this and like what is their agenda, right? And when the agenda is trying to get this person elected and this is a paid advertisement, we need to clarify that and not make that look like it's news when it's not. Yeah. Yeah, really good call out. Yes. Okay. Good work on this. I'm going to show, I'm going to show a quick Additional resource. So when we talk about reading for bias, so we mentioned that All Sides, one of the things that they do is that they provide sort of ratings or like an evaluation of where particular media outlets tend to fall in their coverage. So this is just a static like image version, but actually I will also show you real quick. They have an interactive version on their website, which can be a really useful resource because you can do a deeper dive into how did they decide that this, outlet tends to lean more this direction versus the other? What was their methodology? You can actually, I might even do this. I didn't realize this until I was preparing for this class. You can sign up to be like a volunteer bias rater for them, where you get a newsletter in your email and they don't tell you who the source is. They just send you a bunch of news stories and you just need, excuse me. I'm allergic to newsletters. You get a newsletter with news coverage. They don't tell you who wrote it. They just give you the story and you contribute to their like committee rating of how biased or left, right, or center particular outlets are or particular stories are. So yeah, let me show that just real quick. Okay. So yes, so for each of these, let's see if I choose, I'm going to pick on The Hill because one of my high school journalism buddies worked for them for a while and was a medium big deal in a way that I never was. So if I click on a particular source, right, I can do a deeper dive into how did they come up with this rating? Where does it actually fall on their sort of spectrum? You can see that they did a blind survey, meaning people didn't know which outlets they were rating in 2020 and again in 2022. And then we could scroll down and get a whole bunch of additional information about like, who owns this media, right? Which corporate overlords are we talking about here? And get into like, when we talk about a center rating, what does that mean? And then also, right, and again, another reason that I like All Sides is that they will say center doesn't mean better necessarily, right? It's not that center sources are the best sources and right and left sources are the bad ones. It could mean that they publish equally extreme variations of both left and right and just like won't pick a side, but they still do a lot of sort of like biased writing, just evenly distributed, right? So the reason, and this was actually, I'll come back on and highlight this. So All Sides, when you were asking like, why does All Sides have the headline roundup that we looked at? Really sort of their take on this is that they encourage people to read outlets across the political spectrum, right? To not just get your news from one source, but to actually go and like, if you get your news from social media, go and like and follow news sources that you might disagree with so that you're getting exposed to multiple perspectives and not just getting that one echo chamber filter bubble. So let's see. Do I have? Yes. Okay. So you tell me, based on the conversations we've been having so far, what are some of the things that we can do to either spot bias in media coverage or actions we can take to avoid getting stuck in one of those echo chambers?
Leave the conversation.
You say lead or leave?
Leave.
Yes.
Leave the room.
Leave the room or conversation. Yes, and I will say, so I was like pretty active on Facebook for a few years and have sort of left the room of Facebook, metaphorically speaking, right? Like I mostly don't hang out there anymore. And that is certainly one way. And especially if you notice that there's a bubble that's happening, right? You can choose to say like, this doesn't reflect my values. What else could you do if you notice that there's an echo chamber happening of just like everybody agreeing and taking one specific position? If you're feeling bold.
Disagree.
Sure, yeah. Disagree, whoops. I will add respectfully. Yep. So disagree respectfully if you're feeling so inclined, if you have that like emotional labor available to you at that moment. Thanksgiving is coming up. Some of us get into arguments around the dinner table. so respectfully presenting alternative points of view when you hear someone presenting. The woman who had to step out when she mentioned the example of, like if your neighbor says like, did you hear they're adding 3 new holidays to the school district calendar? Like, what might you say that isn't just, I know, terrible? Like, what could you say instead? It's tricky, right? We don't like to disagree. We are an agreeable species. Sure. Change the subject. That's one option. Yeah.
Instead of using the word I,
Mm.
say, like, I believe this, I believe that, you can say, I heard that.
Yes, so I heard or I read, or maybe like citing sources
Yeah.
as part of that, right? Where did I learn this information from? I would add to that, sometimes like outright disagreeing, if someone comes in hot with an opinion about adding 3 more holidays, like starting by just asking more questions can be a good start. Like, oh, I didn't hear about that. You sound upset about that. Tell me more, right? I didn't realize holidays were that upsetting to you. What's going on there, right? We can ask more questions.
I used to live with the kids about the holidays. To me, it seems like there's so many. I mean, when I was a kid, we hardly had any days off, it'd be like just the main, Independence Day or whatever, now it's like somebody's birthday, whatever, it's a holiday or whatever. Man, really? I'm like, where were they when I was a kid? We never got a day off, it seemed like.
Yep. Well, and that's actually, there's an interesting sort of reversal in what I just heard you say, which is like, some people might be like, can you believe these kids get so many holidays? They should be in school. And somebody else might say like, man, I wish I had that many holidays when I was in school, right? That sounds nice.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lovely thing to provide to kids. And like, maybe I'm a little sad that didn't happen for me, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, right? So we can, even with the same, maybe like same kind of reaction, we don't necessarily have to give it the same like value or weight. Yeah. I would add maybe another version of that is like putting yourself in other people's shoes, others' shoes, others' shoes. Yes. What about like social media things? We talked about this a little bit. If you are a social media user, what are some things that you can do to make sure that your feed is not just like all bunnies all the time, so to speak?
Pick out diverse parts of the news.
Yeah.
You're not getting all just one.
Yes. Yeah. So again, like you can go and intentionally, so let's see. Intention, can I spell? Intentionally follow multiple news sources across the aisle. So that you are getting, and you might see things that you disagree with, and you might be like, oh, blah, like gross. But right, having that exposure rather than just always getting the same point of view repeated back to you is good for our critical thinking. It's good for our understanding of like, what do other people think about this? How does the world think about this? I would add to that actually, following international news sources can be a good strategy as well, right? Because one form of bias is a US centric bias. And if you follow news reporting from other parts of the world, you get other different perspectives on things that are going on. So follow international. And then one strategy that I've seen that was an interesting one to me was to either never never like anything on social media, or because that's hard for most people, because then your best friend posts a cute picture of their baby and suddenly, well, you sort of have to. The other alternative is to just like everything, right? And that for your algorithm, it does actually confuse the algorithm, right? Enough that like it doesn't have a good way to narrow down the focus of what you're actually into.
So it's gonna be more stuff.
I mean, it'll send you more of all of it though, so you can sort of control how much of it you engage with. Yeah. So for me, right, I have just sort of accepted that like my social media is a curated tiny slice of the internet, and it has a lot of cat videos, and it has a lot of content about ADHD hacks, and that's okay because those are things that I value. But also I make sure that I get my news about the world, about like things that are happening in the world from other sources, not just from social media. So
You recommend some.
mhm. Yes. So let's see. Don't just follow social media. Yes. So, and let's see, go away. So you can actually, so all sides on there, come on. It's a really good resource. So I highly recommend because they intentionally do this, like, let's show multiple perspectives. Another one that I like that I've talked about in these sessions before is Ground News, which is a nonprofit. They have a freemium model. So there's a free version, and then you can pay, I think I pay $30 a year. And I decided that was worth it to me, to pay $30 a year to have access to, they do some of the same things that All Sides does, which is provide sort of ratings of like how reliable of a source something is, how left, right, or center it is. But they also do this lovely thing where they give you the least sensationalized version of the headlines. They gather all of the headlines. Let's see, if I go to, let's do a stock markets one. Yeah, okay. So for example, Tesla reports revenue growth of 12% after 2 down quarters in a row. That is their desensationalized headline, synthesized from the 13 sources that they have reporting on that topic. They have basically an AI algorithm that pulls all those sources together, shows you that kind of color bar of left, right, and center coverage, and then says, here's the boring version of this headline, which for me, as like a person who is sensitive to controversy in the world, give me the boring headline. Like I want the least sensationalized version. I want just the facts. I don't want the clickbait version. Yeah, so all of these actually. So this is a little bit of a different approach. Yeah.
I just want to see what the JD Diamond had.
Yeah. So JP Morgan CEO Diamond reports of US stock market correction risk, right? And so actually we can look at this one as an example. Here. Hang on. Proceed to your story. Okay. Right. So they'll tell you we've got 23 articles. This part up here is giving sort of the center version of this story. We could, I guess they don't have enough coverage to create a summary from the left perspective, but we could click and see the right perspective and see how that's slightly different from the center. And then you can scroll down and see like, here's all of the sources that they're reporting on and where they lean. Yeah, it's a really, really robust resource. For me, $30 a year was like well worth it. But like I said, they do have a free version as well. So yes, for me, right, I opt to follow multiple media outlets through an aggregator like All Sides or like Ground News, rather than like, well, I only get my news from this one point of view, right?
Question, so some of these sources that have a subscription, I thought you can access it here at the library?
That is what an excellent transition note to end on, because I've kept you all 10 minutes late. But yes, Ryan, tell us about accessing news sources at the library.
Yeah, I mean, so we do have physical versions of many papers and magazines, but we also have digital access to a lot of sources as well. So from our digital library or website, you can see databases that we subscribe to, and we have lots of magazines, newspapers that you can get for free with your library card. Press Reader is a good one for, it's an app you can download and connect to in our library and be able to see newspapers and magazines. Flipster is another database that we have, or app where you can get magazines that you can look at as well.
Yeah.
So a lot are free, but not all.
Yes. Yes. What an excellent thing for us to wrap up on.